For decades, the conflict between Israel and Iran was a war fought in the shadows. But that shadow war is officially over. A series of direct attacks has dragged this long simmering rivalry out into the open, and we're here to break down how this secret conflict suddenly just exploded onto the world stage.
And wow, the world is already taking sides. I mean, when a global power like Russia uses language this strong, you know we've entered a dangerous new reality. This is not just a regional fight anymore. This thing has global consequences.
And there it is, February 28th. That's the day the unthinkable happened. Direct, coordinated military strikes inside Iran. That one move fundamentally rewrote the rulebook for the entire Middle East.
Okay, so let's get into it. What exactly happened during these strikes? We need to break down the immediate facts and what each side is saying to justify their actions. As you'd expect, you've got three main players and three totally different stories. For Israel, this was a clear-cut preemptive strike against what it called an existential threat. The US, well, its framing was more technical. It was an operation to degrade Iran's military. And Iran? They saw it as pure aggression and fired back with their own strikes, which, of course, just made the whole crisis worse. So this is the million-dollar question, right? An event this huge doesn't just happen out of the blue. To really understand the explosion, we've got to go back and find out where the fire started. And, you might be surprised to hear, it didn't start with hate. It actually started with friendship. To really get what's happening today, we have to wind the clock way back, because the history between these two nations has a pretty shocking twist that explains almost everything that came after. And this is it, the Great Reversal. I mean, look at this. Before 1979, Iran and Israel were actually strategic allies. They shared intelligence, military support, you name it. But then came the 1979 Islamic Revolution, and that relationship completely vanished. The new government in Iran declared Israel illegitimate, started funneling money to anti-Israel groups, and built its entire foreign policy around this hostile rhetoric. We're talking about one of the most dramatic geopolitical flips of the entire 20th century. It really all boils down to one single pivotal year, 1979. The Islamic Revolution wasn't just a turning point, it was the turning point. It basically created the massive fault line that the entire modern conflict is built on. It turned a partner into a sworn enemy, and that set the stage for decades of conflict. Now, open war was just too costly and too risky for either side. So all that hostility, it had to go somewhere. It morphed into something else. A long, complicated, and incredibly deadly shadow war. And the main tool in this shadow war was the proxy. Think of it like this. Instead of your own armies clashing head-to-head, you use other groups, other methods to fight each other indirectly. It was a way to keep the conflict going, but always just below the boiling point. And this fight pretty much played out on three different fronts. First, Iran armed and funded proxy groups like Hezbollah and Hamas to attack Israel. Second, both sides got deep into covert operations. We're talking assassinations of scientists and sabotage of major facilities. And third, the battle went digital, with incredibly sophisticated cyber attacks, like the famous Stuxnet virus that targeted Iran's nuclear program. But here's the thing about shadows. You can't hide in them forever. In the years right before 2026, the conflict started spilling out into the open, and it happened at a pretty alarming speed. Just look at how quickly things accelerated here. It began with some clashes at sea, some drone incidents, then the regional airstrikes got more frequent, more bold. By June 2025, it blew up into a 12-day direct, though limited war. So when the diplomatic talks to cool things down completely collapsed in early 2026, you could pretty much see what was coming next. And that 12-day war was a massive warning sign. It proved that both sides were now willing to hit each other directly, breaking a taboo that had held for decades. So the 2026 strikes weren't the first direct fight, but they were a huge, terrifying escalation of a trend that was already well underway. So, after all these years of covert ops and proxy battles, where does that leave us? Well, it seems like we've entered a brand new and much, much more dangerous era. You can really see how all the pieces of this puzzle fit together, right? The nuclear tension fueled the cyber attacks and the covert ops. The proxy conflict gave them a constant battleground. And eventually, all that simmering tension just boiled over into the direct attacks we're seeing today. Each part fed the others, creating this really dangerous cycle of escalation. So, if you want to boil it all down, it's a pretty clear progression. What started as a war of ideas back in 1979 turned into a war fought through others. And now it has become a direct state-on-state military conflict. The shadows are gone.
And that brings us to the final, really unsettling question. Now that the war is out in the open, with all the old rules shattered, is there any way to turn back? Or is the most important question no longer how we got here, but what on earth comes next?